the whole idea of elected officials are here to represent Canada and a 25-year vision, a positive 25-year vision based on all 6 national interests. And yet, why do they not do that? Because they want to hold power. And the current government is a prime example. So we need to get back to a point where Canadians demand that 25-year vision, and you elect politicians who are best placed to get you there.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that 25-year vision, then all these tiny little wedge issues can be used to win votes to get reelected. If that's your only aim, then the use of fear is exactly how, even at a very local level, you can get reelected while doing huge damage to any kind of a vision for the future.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dialogue Over Division with my friend, Colonel David Redman. And we are here to talk about, I think, a very important topic that we need to hear more about in Canada and maybe the world. But today's topic is going to be basically just about unity. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, talk about this, and really understand why it's such an important part when we're talking about a nation. So, David, I'll turn it to you.
So we've talked previously about all 6 national interests. And so maybe just a quick refresher that a democracy, any country, is defined by national interests. And a democracy is defined by 6 overarching national interests. And if you look at them, they include everything that makes up a country within those 6 topics, because then they subdivide and break down into parts. So just to refresh, the 6 national interests that define a country are: number 1, unity; number 2, national security; number 3, good governance; number 4, rights and freedoms for a democracy; number 5, economic prosperity and growth; and number 6, personal and societal well-being. And so when we talk about a country in simplest terms is when a group of people who share common ethics, values, and beliefs live together in a defined area which they are prepared to defend. So defendable borders that they live in. So out of the 6 national interests that we just defined, the first 2, unity and national security, are the overarching 2 national interests that without which you don't have a country. They are the cornerstones of any defined country, any defined nation in the world. And it doesn't matter whether you're a democracy or a totalitarian government, those 2 are paramount. But for a democracy, without those first 2, your democracy quickly shreds and falls to totalitarian government. So when I talk about unity, I really was disturbed when our previous prime minister, the prime minister for 10 years, constantly talked about Canada as a country with no defining culture, no values, and no beliefs. Even worse, in the last couple of months, we've seen the new prime minister talk about our country and saying things like Muslim values are Canadian values. It clearly shows he hasn't thought about what Canadian values really are. And I find it absolutely abhorrent that somebody would say something like that without a more depth of thought. So maybe one of the things that define a country is its history. And the history of Canada is an extremely rich one with many, many facets. And it defined how we came together and the bond of unity that was made. So one of the things that I've said recently to folks when I was thinking about the Canada Day celebrations, and I watched so many people post about it, and the feeling that people didn't know what to do this Canada Day. The ridiculous statement of elbows up, elbows down, the whole ridiculousness of that, the false bravado of pride, a pride that was bravado, not really deep-rooted sense of unity.
Uh-huh.
So, and I've read many articles in many papers and journals in the last week, people struggling to understand where this new national burst came from, and was it right, was it wrong, and what is it about Canada? And so I wrote back to a few folks and I said, just imagine how people felt on July the 1st, 1867. Let's put the Upper and Lower Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick into a framework in that era. They were citizens who a large number were from our French background, and a large number who were from the Loyalist background who had fled the United States less than 100 years before, when the United States became a nation and separated from Great Britain. So there were strong Loyalist roots in Upper Canada. There was the French Canadian roots in Lower Canada, and a mixture in the Acadia region with Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. But we had a group of people who were extremely proud of this country that was being formed. We had been through the Fenian raids in the 1830s, where people tried to invade Canada and break it away from Great Britain, of Irish descent. And there was a lot of turmoil all through that period, people trying to decide who they were. Leading up to Confederation, there was huge movement in the maritime provinces, particularly in Nova Scotia, that they thought it would be better to join the United States than to join Canada. And in fact, on July 1st, 1867, while Upper and Lower Canada were celebrating the new Canada, the streets of Halifax were draped in black because Charles Tupper had sold them out, had joined Confederation, and they were extremely upset because they thought their future had been in that eastern seaboard. So 1st of July, 1867 was a time of great tension. Even more so, and relating it to today's challenges with our good neighbor to the south, the United States had just finished a horrible civil war. In the 1860s, the United States had gone through mass bloodshed as they redefined their nation. And at the end of that war, they had a huge standing Union Army. And many people thought, we've got this huge army, don't disband it. Now's the time to go for manifest destiny. Canada's sitting right there, ripe for the picking. Now, remember in 1812, the British had defended Upper and Lower Canada because they were British colonies against the Americans, who had tried to take all of North America at that time. Now there was a real threat, a super threat, because this huge standing army was sitting there. Now, fortunately for Canada, that didn't happen. Unfortunately for the First Nations in the United States, that army got turned to the west and went on an extermination campaign of the First Nations in western the US. But Canada at 1867, when Sir John A. first formalized our country, was a country that had many internal divisions, many people who were wondering whether they would rather be American than this new Canada. Many people who were concerned about the manifest destiny coming out of the United States and those direct threats, daily threats made towards this emerging nation. So imagine the mix and boil of emotions that was going on that day. And now think about Canada today, this year. We see exactly the same concerns. People wondering if they would rather be Americans. People looking at the existential threat of the United States wanting manifest destiny again. Of other nations marching in our streets like the Fenians were back in the mid 1800s, waving their flags and trying to rip our unity apart. So it's not like Canada Day 2025 was any different than Canada Day of any other year, and in particular when that new young nation, now 158 years old, um, came into being. But at the base of it all was this purpose of unity, that what we were going to build and the future we were going to build together was more important than all those other challenges. So I just want people to remember that life was never easy. one has to work at things to make them come true. But the most important thing is to have a vision and a look to the future that's positive, not based on fear, but based on confidence. Confidence that as a group of peoples, we can work together with unity of purpose, with unity of beliefs and values, and make the best country in the world. It isn't the Canada of today. It isn't the Canada of 1867. It's the Canada of 25 years from now. So when I wrote the paper that I published on Frontier Center for Public Policy, Canada 2024, I was hoping that people would look at the 6 national interests of our country and define all 6 in a 25-year vision to the future in a positive way, not in a way to shred each other apart. There'll always be challenges. There'll always be areas of great discontent. How do you overcome them? Not ripping it apart and hoping that whatever emerges in these individual pockets will somehow magically be any different, because every country goes through this transformation and constant evolution, but with many, many internal challenges.
Yeah, really interesting. And I thank you so much for taking us through the history, because I think that's just so incredibly important. A couple things um, just to touch on that. Wanted to ask, have we learned anything from all that history? But then the other thing that I really appreciated you saying, and I want to repeat it, and maybe we could go back to it a little bit more, is just that challenge of keeping a democracy strong, holding a society free and democratic. And I think that in Canada, for some reason, and maybe we could talk about that a little bit, is people seem to think that, seem to take it for granted, that that is just, that's the way it should be, the end. They don't even recognize that our neighbors to the south have some of these same problems, or other nations around the world. It's just Canada, I think, has this idea that it was supposed to be perfect. It's not perfect, and the end. And I think that's why there's this tension in Canada right now. And I very much agree with you over Canada Day celebrations. This year was a very strange time. And so, again, like I said from the start, I'm really looking forward to this conversation to dive into all of these topics a bit more.
So the whole idea that things should be easy. In our previous talk, we talked a little bit about what happened with helicopter parenting and bulldozer parenting. And Canada's been blessed since 1812 to 1815. We haven't had a foreign invasion on our landmass. So we've had generation after generation that lived through wars, but they were always foreign wars. And I'd point out my grandfather fought from 1915 to 1919. In fact, he was part of the occupation troops afterwards. He was at Vimy Ridge, lived all through the horror of the trenches. Freedom was not taken for granted by previous generations, because although they were wars that Canadians participated in, they weren't on our soil. And so frequently we saw Canadians, even during those wars, looking around going, why is it important?
Mhm.
World War II, both my mother and father fought in uniform. They were both served in the RCAF during the war. So I understand that connection, and I understand the emotional tie, but my children and my grandchildren, who are now 20, haven't lived through even foreign wars where they saw large millions of Canadians participating in a war effort. Afghanistan for sure, Korea, Afghanistan for sure, but they were limited actions with very small participation, in fact, by Canadians deploying compared to the previous 2 world wars. And so this whole idea that things are supposed to be easy constantly evolved from after World War II. And what we saw was a generation first that was raised to believe that there should be no personal discomfort in anyone's life. And so that's the helicopter parenting. And parents, whenever their child was challenged, would pluck their child out of the situation so that they wouldn't be emotionally traumatized. But we know what happened with helicopter parenting. It made very non-resilient grown-ups. And those non-resilient grown-ups then turned into bulldozer parents who demanded that anyone who challenged their child was removed. And so we watched teachers in schools lose their jobs. We watched university professors removed. Whenever anything challenged an individual, the people who challenged them were thrown out. So the children for 40 years grew up, and I'm not all children, but certainly a large portion of our population believing that risk belonged to someone else. And so when we get to the time now, and we find governments intentionally trying to fragment our nation into smaller groups because a totalitarian government knows that if it can turn citizens against each other, they're much easier to control.
Mhm.
And they always come up with a new fear, not confidence, a new fear of a subgroup within our society. We watched Justin Trudeau saying, do we tolerate these people that won't become vaccinated? He tried to get his own people to turn on the unvaccinated and committed genocide against them. But what was unacceptable changed every day. It,
Yeah.
it was the whole DEI movement, the woke generation, the cancel culture generation was constantly given new targets. And that's where we come back to the discussion of unity.
Can I stop you there for 1 second? Because this is like was just so obvious that to me that the ruling power was the ones in power were really taking advantage of the fear and turning citizens against each other, families, friends, neighbors against each other. And like you said, the goalpost kept moving. Where I also have like so much concern, and I find it unfortunate this is where it's gone, and I don't think we turn to it as much, is elected officials on the opposition side that played into that game. And instead of embracing their own citizens who have been disparaged and shamed and disregarded by their own government, they also were distancing themselves from their own citizens. And I still have such a hard time with that. It makes me uncomfortable that we've allowed it to go that far. Elected officials are meant to represent everyone, not just the people that they agree with. And especially when you're on the opposition and you're seeing the way that those in power are treating their own citizens. So I think it went even almost further. There was nobody standing up for the vulnerable and those being disparaged. And now we're in this really awkward place that so many people don't know who to trust almost. I don't know if that's the right word, or they're looking for a representative in this government, and I don't think they see one because nobody has taken them, much under their wing or fought for them, stood for them. So your thoughts on that?
So yeah, absolutely. What I want to do is it, there's 6 national interests.
Okay.
Good governance. We're going to have a very long discussion when we get to good governance, and you've just highlighted how every single one of the 6 national interests impacts all the other 6, right?
Mhm.
And so the whole concept of unity is exactly what every single elected official, whether they're municipal, provincial, or federal, should be working towards. And I always use the term confidence versus fear. And people say, oh, well, how can you have confidence? We're in the middle of a virus that was going to kill us all. Well, no, as a matter of fact, no, it wasn't. And it doesn't matter even if it was, you have to have confidence that you can overcome a challenge, that
Yeah.
there is a process, that there are good people involved who are going to, with everyone together, look for solutions and pathways out of it. Now, this virus was a joke in that it was not anywhere as deadly as it was portrayed to be, other than to people over 65-year-olds with multiple severe comorbidities.
Mhm.
So for everyone under 65, it was less deadly than annual seasonal influenza. And we knew that in March of 2020.
Yeah.
So everything we did. But instead of trying to unify the population instead of trying to give a confident plan forward and presenting the plan and discussing the plan and constantly evolving the plan with the public. What they did was revert and turn people against each other, telling children they were going to kill their grandparents if they hugged them. I mean, the embedding of fear down in and using it as a totalitarian weapon goes exactly against the first national interest, which is unity, which is in time of extreme danger, you bring your country together and you bring all your citizens into one family in one tent. I constantly talked to the premiers. They didn't answer, but tried to get the premiers to invite the official opposition, whether it was federal, provincial, or municipal, into the planning sessions and have joint statements weekly from the unified government, not a government working against each other. Bring the
Yeah.
government together, as was done in World War II, for instance, when they had a unified cabinet, bringing members of opposition parties into the governing council in times of extreme emergency, not using it as a partisan debating match.
Yeah.
And so, regardless of which party, regardless of political stripes at every order of government, it should have been a time of great national unity, and it was flipped on its head, turning citizens against citizens. And one of the very basic first steps that was used right at the very beginning was to generationally divide people, even though only one generation was at risk.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you showed an example of what could have been done to show unity. And that was one thing naively I thought when we were being locked up into our homes, that we would hear more from our elected officials, not less. And the other thing is, I was like, oh, great, we'll be talking about health during a national health emergency. And we didn't talk about health at all. So that, as soon as I noticed those very large discrepancies, I was really uncomfortable with where the conversation was going. But I think it sometimes takes the example of what could have been, especially now looking back, what
So
elected.
let's just talk right that little piece of good governance. We'll just spend another little second on it. Why on earth would you send all the MPs home for a tiny virus that was only dangerous to people over the age of 65? Why would you disband Parliament and see a prime minister in January of 2020, before any of the lockdowns happened, try to close Parliament for a year and a half and give himself executive authority of a monarch to run all expenditures and all of governance for a year and a half because this virus was coming? Parliament rebelled against that and demanded that he not do that, but then 2 months later sent themselves home and did nothing, and then ultimately worked remotely for a year.
Yeah.
Exactly when Parliament should have been cohesive, should
Yeah.
have been confident in they were going to develop a plan to overcome a virus which was very dangerous for people over 65 with multiple severe comorbidities, and work together to help that generation get through it while ensuring all other generations carried on with their lives in a fear-free manner
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
support those most at risk. So when we get to good governance, we'll talk about the whole idea of closing Parliament, proroguing Parliament, working from home, all those types of things, because human beings need to work together face to face. If you're not able to shake the hand, look in the eye, you can't read the body language, and you can't govern properly. Good governance is based on human interaction, not on people going on holidays over a summer when Canada is at extreme risk financially, ethically, and morally. We see people marching in our streets screaming for the destruction of our country, and our parliament went home on holidays. We've got a prime minister who, when we have the threat coming from the south of economic takeover by our friends and best allies for 100 years to the south seeming to attack us. Good governance is based on many things, but it's based on confidence, not fear, and it's based on meeting face to face constantly and consistently. That's how you create good governance, but it's also how you create unity. Because when you can divide people into smaller and smaller groups and pit them against each other based on fear, you destroy the ability to create confidence. You destroy the ability to refabricate national unity.
Yeah. And it seems like that our government was successful with over the last 2 years.
So, how do you create unity? Well, the first thing
Yes.
you do is you don't do multiculturalism. All right. And Pierre Trudeau, back in the 1970s, brought multiculturalism in my opinion, to do one thing: to keep English speaking Canadians fragmented into smaller groups. All right. And so there's nothing wrong with immigrant populations when they come to Canada being extremely proud of their past and their heritage. But there's a reason why they came to Canada. The reason they came to Canada was for more opportunity, a better life, lack of fear, lack of totalitarian government, a strong democracy. When I served in the military all over the world, I constantly had people who came up, tapped my shoulder where my Canadian flag was, and said, "What a wonderful country. I sure wish we were born there. I sure wish we could live there." They knew intrinsically and constantly told me how they perceived Canada and the
Mhm.
wonderfulness of Canada. So why would immigrants come to Canada wanting to bring all the wars and all the fears and all the starvation to Canada? They want what Canada represents, not what they were fleeing, not what they were coming from, even if it was just for a better economic way of life. It includes all of Canada. So multiculturalism was defined back in the 70s, and you see many countries in Europe walking away from it now. But it was originally defined that you should be proud of your heritage. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But government then funded you to stay in your separate communities,
Mm.
not as a support group for first generation, but for all generations that continued. So government funding, i.e., taxpayers' dollars, nothing's for
Mhm.
free,
Yeah.
taxpayers paid to keep people in small ethnic enclaves that were funded to have their own centers, funded to have their own functions and parties, to march in the streets and bear their flags, not the Canadian flag, their flag. Well, the flag they left to become Canadians, but it was intentional and it was slow. It started off as this wondrous idea where you could bring together groups of people as they first arrived in the country with linguistic supports, with all the rest of understanding they would speak English or French, ultimately within a generation. But the whole idea of multiculturalism was to keep them in enclaves and ultimately then, as we see now, to pit them against each other.
Yeah.
So the whole concept of multiculturalism fights against national unity. The first of my values in national unity is respect. So I always believe that it's the correct thing to do to respect the cultures of the world, to put them into perspective, but to respect them and to respect how they evolved. And that was based on one of the very first foundational elements when Upper Canada and Lower Canada joined together. There was two founding cultures, French and English.
Mhm.
And those two cultures had to stop killing each other. Remember the history of the world. France and Britain, England, had been in constant warfare for 300 years. Here in Canada, after 1759, Plains of Abraham, we decided that we had to find a new way just on this continent because the rest of the world carried on. Napoleon kept marching until, 1815, Battle of Waterloo. But here in Canada, we decided we needed to find a way to stop killing each other. And so English-speaking and French-speaking peoples of Canada, Upper Lowering Canada, formed parliaments long before Confederation and worked together on so many issues. So respect was a fundamental cornerstone and still should be to this day in our country. Respect of other cultures, but respect for the new culture, the Canadian culture, which looks at other cultures, takes the best attributes of them, adds them to our mosaic, and moves forward with a 25-year vision to pull all of the people that have come to Canada and our First Nations forward to a better unified future. So respect for other cultures, but always understanding that the basis, one of the fundamentals that allowed the French and the English cultures to overcome that massive history of warfare was the Judeo-Christian principles of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Other cultures in the world don't believe that very first principle. Okay? Lots of other cultures is do unto them before they can do it to you. Ours is significantly different, and it was the cornerstone of how two warring factions stopped warring and lived together, not always in perfect peace and harmony. Perfect doesn't exist. This is the earth. But in a way that allowed growth, that allowed cohesion, that allowed Canada to stand up in both World War I and World War II as a nation admired by the world, fighting for democracy with people from every province and territory in Canada standing shoulder to shoulder. And nobody cared when you're in that foxhole standing beside the person next to you, whether the person was from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, Quebec, or British Columbia, Alberta. They were your buddy, and you fought to the death with them, and you trusted them and counted on them, and you didn't care what province or territory they came from. You didn't care what their ethnic origins were, which country they had immigrated from, whether they were a First Nations member. They were cohesive, okay? So respect based on Judeo-Christian values, but on the fact that we had two founding cultures, and that we would always find a way to keep those two cultures from going back to their history. All right. So respect to me is the first and very much a binding value. Okay. Because when we define national unity, it's based on our values and beliefs. The second one, the second value and belief, in my opinion, is individual responsibility and resilience. Canada was a country based on immigration, all right? And I know our First Nations folks, they were immigrants too, but they had the same basic individual responsibility and resilience in their culture and all the cultures that came to join here to make this country called Canada. And it was based on the fact that many came with nothing. And they had to establish themselves in a new, in sometimes very hostile environment. And they had to count on themselves and their family unit to overcome that first terrible winter, that first terrible newness of wherever they were, whether it was urban or rural. And they had to integrate into a society with no handouts. There was no, okay, thank you very much for coming. Here's your $5,000 a month. Here's your apartment. Here's your car. Oh, by the way, we're going to try and set you up with a job and all of this. And you get a full year free. And then after that year, if you have individual problems, we'll give you a little bit. No, that's not how our country was founded. And that's not the history of our country up until about 10 years ago. It was, you come to Canada, make your way. You have to be responsible for yourself, and you have to be resilient. You have to be able to bounce back and overcome things. And even for the Canadians that were born here, I'm a multi-generational Canadian. When I started out, it was 18 and out the door. That's how my parents, World War II vets, raised me. 18 and out the door. You'll probably bounce a few times and your bum will hurt when you have to pick yourself up. But you're a grown up now. Go. Right? The world's yours. And it's an exciting world. Look at all the things you can do. 1970 when I, 72 when I joined the army, the world was fascinating. There was all these different places to visit and see. There was huge challenges. The Vietnam War was still raging. A whole bunch of bad things were unfolding on the horizon, but it was exciting. The world was in front of you, but you had to make your own way. You
Yeah.
had to be resilient and you had to be ready to take the bumps that went along the way. There was none of this helicopter parenting or bulldozer parenting. It was stand up for yourself, go for it.
Well, one thing I just want to comment on as you're saying this too is 18 and out the door and, go out, exciting world. But moreover, Canada was an incredibly safe and prosperous nation. So your parents sending you off on your way, I don't think they were that concerned with you going out the door, and I think you at the time were very excited to see the opportunities out there and, delve into all of that. And so it's that environment that was created that helped make, everybody more resilient and accountable. So clearly those 2 go hand in hand,
Yes.
obviously. Yeah. And, obviously, we could see why people aren't so keen to 18 out the door. Parents, I don't think are as keen to do it maybe, but kids, poor kids are afraid because the opportunities aren't there and it just isn't as safe.
So okay. I totally agree, but
Yes.
remember what this is the first of 6 sessions. The
Yes.
second session will be on national security. So why is it that perhaps parents don't feel as secure of launching their children, and why children don't feel as secure launching? When
Yeah.
you have a national security system that doesn't do all the key elements of national security, you end up with a country, a democracy, where you have people in the streets chanting death to other members of their own society.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did we get there? Well, part of it's helicopter parenting and bulldozer parenting. Part of it is our elected officials intentionally creating division, not unity, i.e., our
Mhm.
first national interest. And so each of the 6 relate to each of the other 6, and children trying to find a job is economic prosperity and growth. But the fact is if you want to be a leader in this country, and I don't care whether it's a political leader, an industrial leader, a social work, social services leader, if you want to lead, you have to create a positive vision based on the 6 national interests, and you have to be able to pull forward people with confidence and never use fear.
Mhm.
So that allows people to walk out the door going, I know what Canada's planned to be in 25 years, and I want to be part of that.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be part of that, find a culture, a nation somewhere that espouses your beliefs and values. But
Yeah.
Canada's unity is based on our traditional beliefs and values. And those people that are coming here that don't espouse those beliefs and values are foreign agents and enemy of our country. They are not Canadians who wish a brighter future for Canada. They are people who have come to destroy Canada intentionally, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I wasn't agreeing that that was, what we want, and
Yes.
it's just how was it created? But
Yep.
and then you explained exactly
So
that.
individual and
But
responsible resilience, and it really comes out of our immigrant and our pioneer heritage to this day. Like
yeah,
your family, Eva, is a great example. They came here exactly the same way. Each generation sees a new wave from a new area of the world. The Filipinos now, the boat people back from the end of the Vietnam War, who came here for what Canada represented, a beautiful, peaceful country that was unified in the belief that working together they could create a beautiful 25-year vision for their country where people could live in peace and harmony, raise a family, own property, and interact with their neighbors every day in a positive way, not in a way based on fear.
right. And I say this all the time, we could either elevate the conversation in this country or lower it. and same with the status of the country.
Well,
So that
in almost every conversation that I see, our federal, provincial, not even municipal, every one of our orders of government, the first words out of their mouth are linking somehow to fear.
Mhm.
They're trying to use one of the many methodologies of fear to create an outcome they want, instead of saying, here's how I see Canada in 25 years. This is the types of opportunities I want for all Canadians. This is how I see our mosaic working together. This is how we can flourish. I want a Canada that thrives. I don't want a Canada that survives. And if all we're hoping for is survival, then we have achieved George Orwell's 1984. If this country is based on survival, that's the Soviet Union of the Stalin years, right? All you get just enough bread each week so that you don't starve to death, but that's about it. You want a car, you put your name on the list for one of those little Trabats, and you'll get it in 15 years. Survival is not what Canada should be hoping for. We want a nation that thrives. And we want the world to look at Canada and say, geez, I'd like to be part of that. And we have the right to say, as Canadians, when we get to national security, no, you don't share our common values and beliefs. If you really want what Canada has, this is what a Canadian is. And if you don't fit the ethics and values of our country, I'm sorry, but there's other countries that you can live in. You don't get to come to Canada with ethics and values that are aimed at destroying the ethics and values of the country you're joining. All right. We watched all of this transpire over the last 10 years with mass immigration of peoples that simply don't share. And now we see them marching in our streets. Okay. And I'm an immigrant. I, many generations ago, you're an immigrant. Less generations ago, we strongly understand the history of our country and the unity that was created through shared common ethics, values, and beliefs, but you've got to maintain it. It's not, going back to something you said earlier in the conversation, it's not easy. And you'll have people screaming that you're a phobia and stick whatever you want in the front of it. No, I'm a Canadian. I have ethics, values, and beliefs, and I'm proud of them. I'm unlike the previous prime minister. I know how my culture is defined. I grew up in a household where, a side story, my mother joined in 1941 the RCAF. She joined with two other sisters, three girls, all joined at the same time. As soon as women were allowed to join into the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy in female roles in those times that are different than today, there's been evolution, thank goodness. But the three of them joined. One joined the Army, one joined the Navy, and one joined the Air Force. And get it, they were all obviously in support trades. One was a cook, one was a clerk, and my mother was an X-ray technician. They joined because they liked the uniform. One liked the Navy uniform, one liked the Army uniform. I mean, it sounds funny at the time, but they all joined up, and my mother was incensed, absolutely enraged, because on the enrollment form, they couldn't choose their ethnic origin as Canadian. It wasn't until 1949 that Canadians could call themselves Canadians by origin. Okay, there was a law passed in 1949. We were finally allowed to be what we knew we had been for hundreds of years, Canadians. We were born here, raised here, but we couldn't choose that. So the funny part of the story is each of my sisters, they never talked about it. They all went into different recruiting centers, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and they all filled out the forms, and they didn't know what they'd done until about the 6th week of a 10-week basic training. And they all were summoned to the commandant's office. Now, remember 1941, we've been at war for 2 years, 1939. And it was treason to lie on your enrollment form. And the penalty for treason was death. They were sitting around. They were summoned at very late in the afternoon by a very stern warrant officer that they were to be in the commandant's office of the 10RD training depot in Calgary at 10 o'clock the next morning. And they went, "What the hell have we done?" Fear instantly took hold of them rather than any logic. And they, over coffee that night, realized one had declared their heritage as Irish, one had declared it as English, and my mother had declared it as Scottish because they had grandparents and come from different and all fled getting to Canada for different reasons. So they had lied clearly on their enrollment forms. So they got to the commandant's office only to discover that it was a photo opportunity for the war effort that three sisters had joined on the same day, Army, Navy, and Air Force. What a perfect photo op, joining all three services on the same day, three sisters for the war effort.
Yeah.
So, but the whole story is the unity of just being allowed to call yourself a Canadian is a new thing. It didn't happen until after World War II. So that whole idea of wanting to be a Canadian, being so proud of a Canadian and not being allowed to say you're a Canadian and constantly every day standing up for Canada, not for the province that they came from, not from the ethnic origin they came from, but that singular point of being a Canadian. And I watched it on my soldiers' faces in many dangerous places in the terrible wars in the former Republic of Yugoslavia as that country went through a massive civil war, and how proud they were of the other soldiers standing beside them that they shared all those dangers with, of the constant need to touch each other and bond with each other because that little flag on their shoulder set them apart from the horror that was around them.
So it's funny you went to the people getting called any type of phobia, and I was actually going to ask about that because some people want portray that, and I think the mainstream media in Canada and elected officials to have portrayed that as, phobic, racist. And you answered the question I was asking, and I just was going to ask and wanted to highlight that a little bit more. It's not about excluding somebody. In fact, you want to welcome people, almost is what you said. Welcome somebody to a safe and prosperous community where we can elevate you from what you were fleeing, as you were talking about before. And that actually is a lot more compassionate and warm and welcoming than literally anything I've seen in the last while from elected officials. And it's just about how things are framed to us, marketed to us, unfortunately. So that's one topic. If you're interested in commenting on that more, the other thing I wanted to ask you is because you said that on all levels of government, you almost always hear fear in their communication. And I agree. And so, kind of, my question is why? Is it just the short sightedness? Is it just, do you think the, because they've become kind of their own ecosystems right now, it seems that that's seems to be the advice they're getting, or do they not understand that 25-year vision plan might be a more positive and fruitful way of communicating with citizens? So on those 2 points, I'd love to hear a little bit more.
So let's go back to your first point, and you remember the second one because you know I'm old and I'll forget
I
the
wrote
second
that.
one. So the first one, the whole idea, and we're going to talk about it under the six national interests. We're going to get to rights and freedoms, but
Mhm.
rights and freedoms, when you have unity, one of the one of the very basic foundation values of Canadians is individual rights and freedoms. Okay, so I'm on number three of my three. Respect, individual responsibility, now rights and freedoms, and that links directly to people coming to Canada want, or if they don't, they shouldn't come, want the rights and freedoms that are enshrined in our country. It's the basic belief and values. So rights and freedoms. And with rights and freedoms come individual responsibility.
Yeah.
It's the responsibility of every citizen to every day defend the rights and freedoms that represent our country and not to scream genocide on another group of Canadians or any other group in the world, right? We believe in the right to self-responsibility, the right to own property, a huge discussion point right now in our very country. The whole idea of a right, you'll own nothing and be happy. No, the right to personal property, the right to live your life and to interact as much or as little as you want, but with the responsibility to uphold the rights and freedoms of our country. And we saw Canadians answer the call time after time after time to defend the very rights and freedoms that they hold dear in our country to help others who were at the point of losing them, those same rights and freedoms. So, rights and freedoms, why? If someone comes to Canada who doesn't believe in the basic rights and freedoms, then they don't want to be a Canadian. So please go to a country that represents your belief. And if you believe, there's lots of people in the world that believe a Chinese proverb, better 1,000 years of tyranny than 1 year of chaos. The reason is in a country like China, where there was always been millions of people stacked on each other, 1 year of chaos meant millions die. So they would rather have a strong, benevolent dictator that sometimes didn't turn out to be benevolent than have democracy, because democracy is messy. It's horrible. It's constantly changing. It's Churchill, I think, to paraphrase one of the things he said, democracy is the worst form of government other than every other type we've tried so far. Something to that effect, right? So you got to know that if you're coming to a country that believes in individual rights and freedoms, sooner or later, some of those rights and freedoms are going to butt heads, and
Yeah.
they're not going to. And so you're always going to have to come to some kind of a compromise to work within the framework. But fundamentally, at the grassroots, is the belief in individual responsibility, the right to own property, and the right to raise your family without harm, right?
Well, and you explained that so well with the rights and freedoms having to want that, otherwise don't come. Because that's what, as a lawyer, it's been so hard for me to see. You could blatantly see the rule of law not being applied the same way to different people and
Right.
different groups and different ideologies. And it's just like that, that can't be correct because there's only one set of rules in law. And so I've had a really hard time obviously digesting that. And I don't understand why more people don't talk about that, because there's only one set of rules, rights, and freedoms that
Okay,
we
you're
have.
jumping ahead to good
I
governance
know
again.
it's everywhere.
They're
I
all
love that
linked, right?
section. But yeah,
But
I'm
that
also,
unity
yeah,
is the basis. Without that
yeah,
unity, you
yeah.
don't have law.
So then the second question I think goes to this, but as you could see that they are all like flowing in for me
Yeah.
more, is why is it that we see elected officials on all levels going to fear over vision and confidence and unity and strength and prosperity and safety and all the good things we want in a country and a society?
I think we've seen since World War II, and really very much more in the last 10 years than like on steroids, a devolution of elected officials' understanding of their role
Mm,
at all orders of government,
yeah.
that their job is to represent the people, not to get reelected. Okay? Represent the people, win the next election. And we've gotten into this situation where holding power for whatever reason, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why, at the federal order of government, we saw a whole bunch of elected officials when Trudeau was thrown out by the party and Chrystia Freeland did her big act of defiance. All of them said, "Oh, I need to spend more time with my family." And they all said they were stepping back from politics and all the rest of it. Suddenly, Carney becomes a leader, and all of them come running back to the trough. And I mean that just the way I said it. They left because the free gravy train was over, but Carney was going to win, and they could have power again for their own selfish interests. And
Yeah.
we've seen this devolution of elected officials believing, and I mean of all parties and all stripes, believing that winning is more important than good governance. And the role of an elected official is to represent the people, not to represent their own interests, whether they are political interests, i.e., one of the politicians constantly said, two of them, in fact, before the last election, well, my constituents don't believe in Canadian ethics and values, and I have to represent them. No, your job is to represent Canada, and Canada's ethics and values aren't about exterminating another race on the earth. Okay. So if you find a personal challenge between being an elected official and representing a subset of your constituency who wants not to be Canadian versus another subset of your constituency who believe in Canadian beliefs and values, you only have one choice. You're elected to represent Canada, its values and beliefs, and the citizens of your country that believe in those values. You're not here to represent a group that's trying to destroy Canada and destroy other countries. And so I believe our elected officials, in many cases, and definitely not all, but many of them have lost their way. And party politics have gotten so that there is no such thing as free votes anymore. Everything now, the party whip says you all have to vote with me, even if it's not a confidence vote. And so when we get to good governance, we can talk about all of that and that devolution. But the whole idea of elected officials are here to represent Canada and a 25-year vision, a positive 25-year vision based on all 6 national interests. And yet, why do they not do that? Because they want to hold power. And the current government is a prime example, federal government,
And
and
provincially.
every government. We see the same in every province and territory in
Yeah.
Canada, but
When they get
sometimes
hold of the
with good
power.
aims and
Yeah.
sometimes with not so
Yeah.
good aims. But having
Yeah.
power is more important than representing the ideals, the unity of our country, each of the 6 national interests. And so we need to get back to a point where Canadians demand that 25-year vision, and you
Yeah.
elect politicians who are best placed to get you there.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that 25-year vision, then all these tiny little wedge issues can be used to win votes to
Yeah.
get reelected. If that's your only aim, then the use of fear is exactly how, even at a very local level, you can get reelected while doing huge damage to any kind of a vision for the future. And we look at where we are now. We have the lowest GDP in the OECD. We have unbelievable turmoil in our streets. We have criminal organizations running cities inside the cities and across our country. We're being called out by our largest trading partner and best ally for the past 100 years. Why? Because we've allowed wedge issues to overtake national unity and
Yeah.
to overtake all of good governance and all of economic prosperity and growth. Okay, so all 6 of our national interests, but without that unity and that sense of purpose and that belief. So maybe just to link the first 3 into the fourth, and there's 4 more to go, but pride in our unique democracy is where all this leads to. Okay. The first, respect, the individual responsibility, and the rights and freedoms. Those 3 first elements have created this extremely unique democracy called Canada. We're different than any other democracy on the planet. There's still age-old hatred between France and England just below the surface. There's still a distrust between Germany, France, between Poland and Russia, but in Canada, all the immigrants that came from all those countries that still today in those countries have those deep-rooted national traits, their identity, we were able to overcome them here because we've made a unique democracy in the world. There is no other democracy in the world like Canada. We're a strange, strange combination of socialism mixed with um, free market economy, capitalism. We're not like anywhere. We're Canada. And when people used to look at Canada, they saw they're different. We're different than Australia. We're different than the other Commonwealth countries that evolved out of Great Britain. We're not like Great Britain at all. And we've got a prime minister now saying we're more European than Europeans. And I call BS. We're nothing like them. We don't still bear those age-old animosities between the races of those unique democracies. We're a democracy like nowhere else, and we should have a massive pride in our uniqueness. It should be taught in our elementary schools, our junior highs, and our senior highs. It should be the topic of course studies in our graduate and postgraduate schools. How did Canada become this unique, wonderful democracy? And all the pieces based on the 6 national interests that are represented in that unique democracy. And that's what in 1967, as a teenager, I saw as I stepped out into the world. I was there as a teenager in 1967, and the world looked at Canada and went, wow, the next 100 years belongs to Canada. And as a young Canadian, my pride in my country, because I've been taught my history in school, and I knew all about the bad parts, I also knew about all the good parts. Now we seem to only want to talk about the bad parts. We need to talk about why this unique democracy exists and how it got here. And we need to teach that history over and over and over again so we can learn from our past while projecting to a 25-year vision for the future based on the best pieces of our past and let the worst ones fall away and overcome those challenges. Okay? So the uniqueness of our democracy, the fourth element in our ethics, values, and beliefs. So with that in mind, I'll go to the next one, which is, to me, compassion. So in the Canadian ethics and values and beliefs, there's 7 of them I'm going through here. I'm up to number 5, compassion. Compassion is not to be distorted with social activism. Compassion is looking at someone who needs a hand up in the short term and being there to help them when they need it the most, and then knowing that it's embarrassing for them to constantly be the receivers of continuous overflowing compassion. And once they're back on their own feet, to step back and let them carry on that individual responsibility. My grandfather, they lost their whole, they had a cattle ranch, dairy and cattle ranch in southern British Columbia. They lost the whole thing in the Great Depression because what most people forget, along with the Great Depression economically, there was a 7-year drought in all of Western Canada. So for all the climate change activists, that drought happened long before all of the current technologies. So in the dirty 30s, farms blew away, crops blew away. They couldn't feed the cattle. They ultimately had to kill them all off. And they lost the whole ranch, White Mountain, at the south end of the Okanagan Valley. And he ended up ultimately working on the railroad, driving spikes on the railroad in one of the national projects on Vancouver Island. But for one whole month, all the family had to eat was a bag of rotting potatoes. And even the dog, because everything else died too, was eating potatoes. My mother remembers it very well. And that was one of the reasons why my mother went to her grave saving everything in case there was another Great Depression, right?
Sounds like my mom
The
from
milk bags
communist home.
that milk used to come in. When my sister took over the house to clean it out, there was 3 shelves of plastic milk bags, all tied up in groups, bundles of 10, so she could put preserves down for the next 200 years. Anyhow, that taught
Yeah.
But what he refused to take the government handouts till his 7 children almost died. That was the individual pride and self-responsibility. And we've gone from there to this generation that refuses to move out of their parents' basements until they can afford a house equivalent to their parents' house and get a job equivalent to their parents' job. So there's a long step between there and there. And I know I'm making a false analogy, but it's huge. The difference in mindset. Compassion is helping somebody through the worst moment of their life and then stepping back and letting them carry on. Okay. And compassion for our neighbors, learn from that pioneer prairie. It was 5 kilometers to your nearest neighbor, but when they needed a barn, you all got together and you built the barn, and then you came home and they carried on with their life and you carried on with yours. But also for other nations, when another nation is at its worst time ever, Canadian compassion overflowed and went out, but not forever, not generation after generation after generation. If another nation can't ultimately get itself out of its own bind, it's up to their citizens to do it. But you help them
Yeah.
for that one critical moment in time. So Canadians have always been compassionate. And again, I link it back partially to our immigrant and our pioneer heritage of helping people when they're at their most need, but not always, not
Yeah.
continuously. And a lot of socialism today, unfortunately, has gotten to that point where we believe everyone should deserve the universal basic income. In my mind, that is absolutely the worst concept economically for individuals, because it takes away all personal responsibility for 18 and out the door. It takes away all self accountability because I'm always going to get this. So and if you want examples of what that looks like, there's many examples in the world of where the complete utter failure of nations has been based on it. And I put it to you, all you have to do is look in places like Birmingham in England, where there's now been 3 generations out of work because the steel mill closed, and through social services, not called universal basic income, but it's exactly the same, a guaranteed income for the rest of your life, your children's lives, and their children's lives. You end up with ghettos. You don't want that. And
Mhm.
the removal of self-responsibility, going back to my bullet number 2, individual responsibility and resilience, is a Canadian unity, ethic, and value. And if you remove that, you have destroyed Canada and you've turned it into not Canada. You've turned it
Yeah.
into the Soviet Union. Okay. So
Yeah.
compassion, but only to the point to help them through the worst period of time, and then with an expectation that they go back to individual responsibility.
On compassion, I just wanted to say one thing. It seems like common sense. It seems strong and it seems great. Like, that's it. Like there's doesn't seem complicated.
No, but it doesn't exist in every nation of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Compassion, yeah, I give you Rwanda back in the massacre, the complete genocide. Compassion is not Canadian compassion. The definition of Canadian compassion, the unique unity value of compassion in Canada, is not represented in all nations of the world. Hatred completely overcomes compassion, right? And that's why when you see politicians using fear, they're creating hatred to overcome compassion for others, to the point that you're willing. What do we do with these people that won't get vaccinated? And the implied threat of that was we kill them, right? We remove them from Canadian
From
society because they're
society.
putting
Yeah.
us all at risk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing I tried to get people to see, that what is the natural logical extension of that? And that was it. And
It's
but
the
it's
opposite of the
it
the
yes.
unity
Yeah.
value of compassion.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay?
Yeah. Yep.
If you want someone to change their belief or change how they interact, then you explain to them why, but without fear. You
Yeah.
give them a positive goal. You don't use fear to there's so many ways to use confidence rather than fear. Lazy politicians know that fear is an instant trigger and it'll get you an instant gratification, right? Com- The confidence, you actually have to make a plan. You actually have to take the time and put the effort into making a plan to overcome the challenge in a positive way and not just resort to fear.
Yeah.
Okay. So number 6, and I really believe it's a core Canadian ethic and value. It's one of our fundamental foundational beliefs, which is inequality. It makes me extremely angry to watch a prime minister apologize for slavery in Canada. Canada was formed in 1867. The Slavery Act of 1853 in other countries and ultimately in Canada meant there was never slavery in Canada. In Upper and Lower Canada, we were one of the first colonies to remove it completely. But all through Africa, all through the Middle East, all through the Far East, many parts of Europe, slavery still exists to this day. Canada has always believed in equality. We weren't perfect. We definitely weren't perfect. We learn from our past, but we constantly evolve to the future. And when I see groups of people in Canada to this day believing that women aren't equal to men, then you have broken one of the 6 foundational unity elements of our country. The fact that Canada was one of the first countries in the world to give women the right to vote. It was based on this basic belief of Canadians that people were equal. It took longer than it should have, but by the end of this First World War, women had the right to vote in our country and have ever since. The equality of all immigrants that have come to our country, working together for a positive future. The equality of people, regardless of race, color, creed, all of them, right? I was brought up to believe in colored blindness as the racial top level. We're now being taught that's a legacy belief, which is somehow a terrorist. That there has to be a Black History Month, a Chinese History Month. No, the whole idea of Canada, one of our foundational beliefs was that ultimately everyone is equal. And we need to treat each other as equals and walk into a room and not instantly be fearful when we see someone of a different culture, a different skin color, or a different sex.
Yeah.
To put it basic. The basic belief that all people are equal. And you don't have to trust all people. Trust is built from respect of knowing them and watching them. But I always walked into a room fundamentally believing that everyone in that room was good till they proved otherwise. Once they proved otherwise, then I would do what was within my ability to manage the issue that made them not deserve to be treated equally. Right. And there's so many ways. It doesn't have to be criminal. It can be, but all those, one of the foundational values of Canadians is a fundamental belief in equality. When I took in my last field command, 137 out of 797 of my soldiers were women. I just called them soldiers. Right. We never talked about men soldiers and women soldiers. They were soldiers. And when we were in the former Republic of Yugoslavia, my soldiers, magnificent, held these national beliefs, these national values every day when they dealt with other nations. Now, the look on some of the other nations' faces when they saw one of my soldiers who wasn't male walk into a really dangerous situation with a rifle in their arms and said, "No, stop doing that. Get over there." Their first reaction was disbelief, and then their second reaction was to do what they were told because that soldier spoke with authority and pure competence.
Yeah.
Right? So this whole idea of equality, anyone who wants to come to Canada, any new immigrant coming to Canada, if you don't believe in equality, in particular, equality of women, then Canada is not the country you should come to. There's lots of other countries that probably represent your values and your beliefs better. Don't come to this country and try to change it. This country believes in fundamental equality, and in particular for women, but all races, all colors, all creeds, all genders, we just believe in equality. We don't want special treatment for any one of the subsets. Everyone's equal. Let's move forward to a vision together.
And just to pause again, like compassion, this is a good thing because these things have been marketed and sold to us as bad things, that it almost, because it's nobody will go out and say women's rights, women shouldn't have equal rights, but the implication is there that other, like when we're welcoming other cultures, they can do unto women what their cultures say, and nobody is saying, hey, that's not what Canadians believe. That's not a value we hold. We believe in equal rights for women, and that's kind of common sense for around here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Courage. You've heard me talk. You got to be any leader. I don't care whether you're a political leader, industrial leader, a social work leader, built on the principle of ethically fit, physically fit, intellectually fit, but all of those which hold these core national interests at heart for Canadians are useless, ethically fit, physically fit, intellectually, unless you have the fourth, which is courage. If you don't have the courage to apply the ethics, to understand what are the ethics, values, and beliefs of Canadians, then don't be a leader in Canada.
Yeah.
You must have the courage every day to stand up and say, no, that's just wrong. We don't support Sharia law. And we saw one province in Canada, another one right now, almost pass Sharia law as an equal to Canadian law for dealing within a certain community. No. Sharia law is based on many fundamental beliefs that we strongly disagree with in our national interest, but in particular in our national unity. And number one amongst them is equality of women, right? So, no, you have to have the courage to represent all of these ethnics and beliefs. And I never want to hear another political leader, in particular a prime minister, say Canada has no defining culture, values, or beliefs. I don't want to ever hear a prime minister stand up and say Islam's values and beliefs are Canadian values and beliefs. That is absolute. It's just
Rubbish.
wrong. It is not our country. And no one who believes that should lead our country. So equality, so I've got respect, individual responsibility, resilience, rights and freedoms, pride in unique democracy, compassion, equality. And the fast one sort of is the ties all the little pieces together, our unique international standing. And we stand in defense of allies and partners. Huge difference than stand in defense of everyone. Allies and partners are people who we have made special agreements with for the good of the 6 national interests of our country. You don't ally with someone who is going to attack the 6 national interests of your country. You make alliances and partnerships with people who support the 25-year vision of Canada, not who erode or aim to destroy it. Okay? And I can't think of a better example than China, who has, for 2 generations, worked within our country to step by step erode and destroy every one of the 6 national interests of our country. And we can talk about unity this time and the others later. But unity, when they intentionally fund groups like the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Canada, to march in our streets, to fracture our country, to other groups and organizations to run drug cartels in our country, who import through our ports goods and services that are of danger and are out here for one reason and one reason only, to destroy Canadians and our economy, then we don't treat them as an ally. In fact, we treat them as an enemy. And anybody who wants to do trade with China, who's a Canadian, in my opinion, isn't a trader. They're just on their own. Don't expect government support to bail you out when you go and you get captured, or when your trade fails because they close the market to you, or they impose a massive tariff on you. You dealt with the devil. Now I'm sorry, you're going to pay your due. But we have a special relationship with allies. And if we don't do our part to support their national interests while supporting our own, then we deserve the consequences of that as well. And we have our partner to the south saying, you haven't carried any water in your bucket for at least 20 years, the last 10 year blatantly. So now there's a consequence. So they're doing what I just said we should be doing to China, because they're looking at us saying, you're the weakest link. So if we don't do our part for individual responsibility and resilience, for our defend our own rights and freedoms, to express our constant national unity, we can only expect bad outcomes. And so we need to make sure that we support our allies and partners to the manner we have promised. And at the same time, we don't interfere in other sovereign nations unless they specifically ask for it. And then we only do it for a limited time till they can stand on their own 2 feet, and only if it's in the national interest of our country. So that whole international standing has the 2 elements: cooperation and self-responsibility within our allies, alliances, and partnerships, but at the same time helping other sovereign nations, but not interfering in other sovereign nations. And so to me, that's what defines the unique Canadian ethics, values, and beliefs. The 7 fundamental blocks, and I would love to work with others to expand or contract or but the whole concept is Canada's unique. And it's built on this unity principle, because unity and national security are the first 2 of the 6 national interests. And without unity and without national security, you have no country. And right now, we're at that terrible place where our unity and our national security have been challenged so badly that many people are asking whether Canada is still a country.
I didn't think I would disagree with you on anything, but there was one thing that I disagreed with you on. And you said, and I think I would just expand on it actually. Winning to the elected officials is more important than good governance. And I think that winning is important because then you can't govern at all. But I think good governance and defending our national unity and all of the things you talked about is a winning strategy. And none of our elected
I
officials
totally
are
agree.
going for it.
I've just found that politicians have become lazy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
winning is more important than
Yeah.
show me in the platforms, federally, provincially, and municipally, any leader, backbencher, emerging, who talks about a 25-year vision for our country and talks about it through each of the 6 national interests. All right.
Mhm.
And the reason I say all 6 is because they don't exist without each other, but each one of them must be understood to define a 25-year vision based on confidence. And so I want to see a leader standing up saying, no, I'm not going to do that because it doesn't fit in this national interest that leads to that vision. And so first you have to declare the vision. And so what can Canada be? Is the definition of success a Canada that is 80 million people? Or is the definition of success a Canada with, I don't care, put in a number of people, where the citizens live in a free, strong democracy, where individual rights are defended, and where they can own property, raise a family, and live in peace and harmony? Which vision is more important? Is it more important that we get 80 million people? Why? Why? We're constantly told that AI, that technology is going to replace workers. So why do we need more workers?
Yeah.
Let's have a coherent strategy that has the right number of people with the right vision for our future in a country that is a unique democracy admired by the world.
My last question for you today, but you're welcome, obviously. I don't know if you, because we've gone through the unity portion, but my question to you is, I feel that we are living in an upside world right now, and we really need some adults in charge. And I can't imagine, David, with your background and your experience, what it's like to be watching what I describe as children, spineless, often individuals taking these positions of power and and representing themselves as leaders.
I my wife calls me Pollyanna. I have this undeniable urge to believe that good can come out of any situation ultimately. Um, and rather than fragment and destroy something, I believe we should find what's wrong and repair it and to work forward. Um, I watched as so many countries in the world fragment, and what happens is they get gobbled up by other countries. And so while people with best of intentions think that they're going to create a utopia, utopia constantly fails. And any democracy, as I said before, is messy. Canada's been through some really rough economic times before. It's been through some tremendous upheavals. Um, I give you the Great Depression. Think about what Canadians were feeling for 7 long years of the Great Depression, and think how horrible that the only way they got out of it was with a world war. Okay? The Canadians have felt challenges before and have found a way slowly but surely to rebuild their unity, to ensure they had national security. And we'll talk about all of that. That's not being a military force that projects around the world. That's about having stability within your own country, safe and secure.
Mhm.
Think about how we evolved out of. Because remember back at the start of World War II, there was communist movements, Nazi movements, flavors of all type marching in our streets here in Canada in the 1930s. Because when you're in a time of great upheaval, it's the time for all of the ists to come out, right? All of the fascism and Nazism and communism, all the isms come out in the streets. We're in one of those stages right now, and we can emerge from it just like we've done before, but we can do it in a coherent, positive way by finding and working together with leadership that looks to a positive future, not through fragmentation, but through cohesion and what got us here. The
Yeah.
pride in the country that got us here. And I just want to come back to fundamental. I'm a soldier. Okay. So I always wanted to be a soldier. It's all I ever wanted to be. And after the Chrétien government destroyed the army, I got out and did emergency management for a decade. But I equate things back down to very basic human nature. And if you haven't read With the Old Breed, it's the story of the US Marines in World War II, and it's a factual novel. It's the story of one individual's experiences in Peleliu and in Okinawa. And the point he makes over and over and over again is it's the person on your left and the person on your right who help you through all the horrible hardships, who get you through those unbelievable experiences, but who always looked to the future and knew somehow, some way it would get better and
Yeah.
work forward every day. But the trust and the bond between individuals. So I look at it as a soldier. The soldier that was sitting with me on the floor on October 30th, 1995, while Quebec was holding its referendum on separation. And those hundreds of soldiers that were sitting in a circle around me, with me and my regimental sergeant major in the middle, the look on their face was fear. We were in the middle of a horrific civil war raging all around us every day in the former Republic of Yugoslavia. And every one of those soldiers, no matter which province or territory, and I put it you that 20%, 25% of my battalion were Francophones from Quebec, were wondering whether that's what we were going home to. A fractured country in a civil war, fighting amongst ourselves because Quebec had separated and the whole country of Canada started to devolve? Or were we going to come home and help re-solidify and make a future for our country? And I looked at
Mhm.
every one of those soldiers and I saw a Quebecer sitting beside an Albertan, sitting beside a BC, sitting beside an Ontario, sitting beside lots of Nova Scotians and a whole bunch of Newfoundlanders. And all of them looking at each other. And when it became clear at 4:30 in the morning that very narrowly, but Quebec wasn't leaving, they all stood up, hugged each other, and walked out, knowing they had a future that involved a beautiful country called Canada, based on 6 national interests that they were going in their uniform and out of uniform to help restore as soon as they got home.
Yeah.
So to me, I always come back to humans need to interact, that we need to bond, that we need to talk, and that our unity is the cornerstone along with national security. And we'll talk about it next time. That those two fundamentals make all the rest possible. Without those
Yeah.
two, Canada will cease to exist within a generation.
Yeah, and I think I really enjoy talking to you because I hold those same beliefs. As if there's a problem, I think there's a solution. I think it's incredibly naive to think even if you have a different geological boundary, these same issues won't exist. And if we
Exactly.
don't have the courage enough to talk about them and deal with them now, what makes anyone think we're going to do that later? So,
Any new
uh,
country evolving out of a piece of Canada, and we live in Alberta, so we know all the discussion that's going on, will go through these exact same challenges because they don't have those 6 national interests coherently defined. And even when they do, they will reach their Waterloo too. And
yeah.
how do they overcome it, right? Do they overcome it by fear, or do they overcome it with confidence and by building the unity that they need in order to have that beautiful future in 25 years they're claiming we'll all enjoy?
So well said. Thank you so much. These are things we just need to keep coming back to as citizens, especially leaders in our country.
Correct.
I think that I think if we start talking about them as citizens and start, raising these issues more and more, then they will have no choice but to start talking about these. So thank you again. Enlightening and very thought provoking. And I already can't wait for the next one.
Thanks, Eva.